Pharaoh's killing kids. God is killing kids. What are the systems and structures that are putting the youngest and the most vulnerable at risk?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, and we're back. If you've watched last week's, you'll notice we're in the exact same place. The Word Made Fresh, Reverend Jim Keat, Reverend Adriene Thorne. We're talking about every week's upcoming narrative lectionary passage. Shh, it's a filming. Okay, secret's up. Okay, we are talking about Exodus. So we've gone from a garden to a guy to brothers. That's the Genesis narrative we had. And now we are in Exodus. And we skip a lot of Moses, and we just get this moment of the Passover, of God saying, God hasn't yet given the commandment, thou shalt not kill, so apparently God's off the hook, but this is where God's going to kill a bunch of people.
Oh my goodness.
Lovely Bible text for a Sunday school lesson, right?
No, it's actually a really horrible text. So violent.
Yeah.
And the fact that innocent people, children, have to die for something that they had no hand in, sounds familiar and continues to happen in the world, is really, I think, scandalous. And I think, begs a question about what sort of God would do this. And, that may be a sermon for another day. But the fact that these firstborn things, animals and children, must die as retribution or as payment.
Or as like a threat to get Pharaoh to finally let them go. And it's it's like dropping a nuclear bomb to end the war kind of a thing. Yeah, it's a troubling text. So I think for this one, I probably do need to go and read some of the Midrash and look at what our Jewish siblings are saying. I find those spaces really helpful when we are looking at texts that, perhaps cause us to throw our hands up and wonder what's going on. Because we talk about, this theme of imagine a church. And I just think, what kind of God are we imagining?
Right.
And a text like this just puts me in this place of like, oh, if there's a God I don't want to believe in, it's the God who kills kids. It's a God who kills animals. I mean, I have 3 pets and 2 kids, and I don't want any of them to have any harm come to them.
Yes.
And it's not in the portion of the narrative lectionary text. It's a little bit more in chapter 12, but it talks about when that happens, there's not a single Egyptian house where there's not weeping heard.
Yes.
And I grew up knowing the story of 10 Commandments, Exodus, all that thing, like, oh, this last plague was just the one little blip that finally got the Israelites free, right? But I never actually empathized with the Egyptian families who were on the other side of that story.
Right. Because why would you? The text certainly makes the Egyptians the enemy.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And I think it probably is the genesis of a lot of the stories that are part of our culture. You think about a variety of movies and plays and whatnot. You have a common enemy, and of course, killing them so that you can escape or have the thing that you need or want is like, sure, that's just what you do. And I think one of perhaps the more hopeful things about our culture is that we do stop now, I think, and interrogate these texts in a way that make us go, well, what about the Egyptians? And like, what about the ones who weren't on board with what Pharaoh was doing, who maybe thought there should not be slaves, who perhaps thought, let these people go. So my child is dying. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't support this. And I think there's some parallels to that in our own lives where people suffer for things that kings and pharaohs and presidents and folks with power do. Regular folks suffer and have no say in decisions that then affect their lives in horrible and catastrophic ways.
Oh, well, I'm grateful you were in the pulpit for this one.
It's a series of tough ones. These early books of the Bible are just really difficult.
Especially reading them today. I mean, we recognize they weren't written for us today. They came from a whole different time and culture. They're not history books even. They tell a whole different oral history. I mean, we're into Exodus now, which is a whole other, mixed experience of how did this even narrative emerge and what is its function. But too often it's used to justify certain postures of violence or us versus them, and the us is always right and the them is always wrong, or just assuming violence is inevitable rather than questioning that as a construct to begin with.
Well, I know one of the things that Reverend Lisa Weaver often will talk about is how the text is not prescriptive, it's descriptive. So it's describing a time, it's describing perhaps our tendency towards violence or our tendency towards something other than the sanctity of life. And we certainly see echoes of that in our current culture. So you might say it's this verse isn't repeating, but it's harmonizing. So you see strains of this same sort of disregard for life. And again, this week with children being harmed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe preachers watching this, help a preacher out. Leave some comments with how are you even holding a text like this?
Right.
And that's a good comment for us all to share with one another. If you're not a preacher, I ordain you as preacher. So leave your comment now. That's right, Lorraine, I'm talking to you. And we want to hear how you would hold these just heavy texts that seem to fly in the face of a God who is love. How do you have a God? I mean, I'm not trying to create, was it Markian, the heresy, where you have two different gods of the Old Testament? I'm not trying to create that.
Yeah.
That's, again, where the prescriptive, descriptive is helpful. This is just describing a cultural viewpoint of the divine. And it was one where violence was the norm and a different value of life.
I will say, though, as you were talking, what emerged for me, just this sort of casualness, it does make me think about gun violence. It does make me think about how folks in power say things like, this is just our reality, right? Where folks on top are making decisions that have these life-ending, life-threatening consequences for folks who did not have a say. And very often I think we're feeling very helpless and powerless around gun control and the safety of our children who we send off to school every week. So maybe there's a way in that way. The ways that and not even just guns, but even how the working age for children is being lowered. There are threats about doing away with the Department of Education, and people who are worried that that's happening so that we can actually send children into factories and fields and get those little hands working for the benefit again of the folks on the top.
It makes me think this is an interesting text to just approach with that particularity towards the experience of children. It's a good lens to read the entire Bible through because they are often the most vulnerable and literally overlooked because they're just shorter. But like you said, the parallels to our world today, but then even thinking how the story of Exodus begins with this threat to children and Moses being sent on the river because Pharaoh was, so there's this constant, Pharaoh's killing kids, God is killing kids. What are the systems and structures that are putting the youngest and the most vulnerable at risk?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this could be a really fruitful path to explore for Sunday.
Okay, so here's the challenge for this one. This is my new thing, if you haven't caught on. Since we're actually in the same physical space, we're going to play Pass the Sermon.
Okay.
So one of us is going to start, and then when you pass the magic sermon to the next person.
Preaching
just a little version of it, and then we'll see where it goes.
All right.
And let's keep ourselves let's limit our inner preacher from going for an hour and keep it to the sake of a YouTube video. So I'll let you begin since you're my boss.
And we're beginning with the story of the Exodus.
Wherever you want to take it. So we just got something here.
Okay. God, what is going on?
Because we sure as hell don't know what's going on. And it seems like the systems are just perpetuating disarray and danger.
What is happening with the children? We are reading this ancient text which has echoes in our current reality, and we have to ask again, what is going on with the children?
We are hopeful to be people who see them and care for them and confront whatever power, be it Pharaoh or politics or religion, that puts them at risk.
And we remember this day, the families who have lost innocence. We grieve with parents and aunties and uncles, with all who love children who are harmed senselessly. For all those who have lost children because of policies that they had no say in. God, we ask that you would be near to these brokenhearted and that you would inspire in us a love for justice that changes what those in power are able to do.
Amen.
Amen. That was awesome.
That was fun. All right, see you next week.
I flipped into prayer, though. Kind of service.
Sermons, prayers, they kind of blend together after a while.